Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Common. WBUR senior health reporter Priyanka Dayal McCluskey. Welcome back to The Common.
Thank you.
So Priyanka, colder weather will be here soon, and with that comes the risk of more people getting sick with the flu and COVID and RSV. Hopefully not all at once. But we're already seeing an increase in reported COVID cases. Just last week, the state reported there were 2,700 new cases in Massachusetts. So let's start here with COVID. How concerned are doctors and experts with the rise in cases?
Yeah, and as you note, Daryl, we're already in this increase. We've been seeing COVID numbers rise for a couple of months now, really since the middle of the summer. And, the context is really important here. So we are seeing increases in COVID, but it's not as bad as it was in previous years. Mm-hmm. Hospitalizations, people who are positive for COVID, those numbers have been increasing in Massachusetts and nationwide, but they are much lower than they've been in previous years. And the people who are hospitalized and have COVID tend not to be as sick as they were in previous upticks. And a reason for that is there's a lot of built up immunity now from previous infections, as well as the many vaccine doses that many of us have received over the past few years.
Okay. Now, who's getting sick?
Well, the people who get most sick from COVID and from other viruses, they tend to be people who are older and have other medical conditions, and they have other risk factors that make them more vulnerable to getting seriously ill. But for a large proportion of the population, COVID is not hitting as hard as it used to because of that built-up immunity.
Got it. What's driving this uptick? What's behind it?
It's hard to say exactly. There are some new variants circulating that may be contributing. It could be people gathering indoors to get out of the weather, whether that's heat or rain. There isn't a specific known cause, but those are some of the factors that could be contributing. And we also just expect COVID to go up and down over time, and it's not following a very predictable pattern, but we do know that we'll see ups and downs over time.
So Priyanka, I understand there is a new booster shot for COVID. Tell us about that.
Actually, the experts are not really calling it a booster anymore, but they want us to think about it like an annual shot, the way we get annual flu shots. So the idea is the COVID vaccine would be updated regularly, just like the flu vaccine is updated to, as best as possible, to match the strains of the virus that are circulating. And the idea is that we can get the COVID and flu shot now at the same time every fall and protect against serious illness going into late fall and the winter. And I'll just note that both the COVID and flu vaccines are approved and recommended for just about everyone older than 6 months.
Got it. So is it safe to say that we are entering this new normal of living with COVID?
I feel like we keep trying to understand the new normal, but yes, there's a couple things that are different now that it does feel a little bit more like a new normal.
We're going to take a break, but we will be right back.
Did you kill Marlene Johnson?
I think you're one of the first people to have actually asked.
From WBUR and ZSP Media, this is Beyond All Repair, a new podcast about an unsolved murder that will leave you questioning everything.
Somebody should be in jail for murdering my sister.
A woman who's never been believed.
As long as they think I have done this, then they're not looking for who actually did this.
And that's what makes it a cold case.
No, it's a botched case.
And a search for the truth, once and for all.
Wow, it just gets more interesting.
Beyond all repair. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Be careful. You're digging in a place that's been very peaceful for a while.
Do it anyway. Dig.
And we are back with more from Priyanka, Dayal, McCluskey. I do want to mention that COVID is not the only threat out there, right, as the weather gets cooler. There's also the flu and RSV, a disease that could be severe for infants and elderly. And you and I actually talked about RSV on The Common last November. Real quick, what kind of threat do these viruses pose to us this year?
So we've already got COVID on the rise, and our true respiratory virus season is still ahead. We typically see that in the fall and winter, people walking around with their coughs and colds. And these three viruses that you mentioned are kind of the major ones that experts are looking at. So COVID, of course, flu, which we tend to see every year, and RSV, which, as you mentioned, there was a really big flare-up of RSV last year. So definitely experts are watching all of these viruses. We expect to see them again. Hopefully not the sort of triple-demic that we saw last year. But there's a key difference this year, which is that we actually have vaccines for all of these viruses for the first time.
Okay, so you mentioned that there's vaccines for all three, of course, the flu and COVID. But with RSV, that vaccine is a first. Am I correct?
That's right. So for the first time this year, we have an approved RSV vaccine for higher risk populations. So that includes people older than 60, as well as pregnant women, and they can pass that protection on to their babies for the first 6 months of life. And we know that newborn babies are really vulnerable to RSV. So this is a new option available now.
Got it. And how can people get access to these vaccines?
Well, vaccines are considered preventive medicine, so they're largely covered by insurance. There are reports that some insurance plans are not immediately covering the RSV vaccine. That's the one for older adults. COVID shots, though, should be free for everyone with insurance. And if you don't have insurance, there's a federal program that will allow you to get free vaccines at many locations.
Any chance we'll see mask mandates return?
I'm not hearing anything about a return to mask mandates at the moment. I do hear advice that if you are higher risk for getting ill or live with people who are higher risk, then you may want to consider as an individual putting a high quality mask on in crowded indoor places. I'm not hearing rumblings about any sort of mandates at this point, though.
Got it. And what will you be watching out for in the coming weeks and months?
We really want to see what happens with case numbers of all of these viruses this year. And are we going to settle into something that's a little bit more predictable or regular or manageable for our healthcare system? So there is some concern for sure, but there's also some optimism because we get virus season every year, and I am hearing some cautious optimism that, this year, maybe it could be just a little bit more regular, routine, and not as big of a strain on the healthcare system, and perhaps not as dangerous and deadly to the population if people get the vaccines that are recommended to help reduce their risks.
Understood. Well, Priyanka, thank you so much for coming through to The Common.
Thank you, Daryl.
That's WBUR senior health reporter Priyanka Dayal McCluskey. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. We really appreciate it. If you like what you're hearing, please go to wherever you listen to podcasts, especially Apple or Spotify. Rate and review us. It helps us a bunch. And thank you to everybody who already has. We truly, truly appreciate it. Also, if you want to contact us, hit us up on Instagram at WBUR The Common, or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.